In my response video, A Defense of Judeo-Christian Slavery, Part 1, I discussed the three different types of biblical servitude, why the God of the Holy Bible made a distinction between them, and addressed some of MereChristianLogic's points in his analogy between the biblical servitude system and the industrial or U.S. wage earning system. In this second part, I will discuss some discrepancies between the Old Testament and the New Testament in regard to servitude and address the question of immorality as I see it concerning slavery in the Holy Bible. Again, I will cite passages from the King James Version of the Holy Bible by book, chapter, and verse, and I still encourage the viewer to read at the very least the entire chapter from which I cite for the sake of context. But first, I'd like to make a clarification from Part 1. In Part 1, under the section God's Reason for the Distinction Between Servants and Slave, I said, you will notice when referring to peoples in the service to others, the Bible uses both the terms servants and slave. They should have actually read, you will notice when referring to peoples in service to others, the Bible uses terms such as servants or bondservants, or bondmen and bondmaids. We have seen in Exodus 21 verses 2 and 3 that the term servant refers not to slaves, but to indentured servants, who are actually fellow Hebrews, whom, after 6 years of service, will be given their freedom. In Leviticus 25, verses 44 to 46, we saw that the term bondman or bondmaid refers to actual slaves, considered heathens who will never be freed and are handed down as inheritance to children from parents. Curiously, the terms bondman, bondmaid, or bondservant are nearly absent from the New Testament, with bondman and bondmaid appearing only once each and bondservants not appearing at all. This is according to the King James Version of the Holy Bible. However, the term servant is used over 150 times in the New Testament. I find this curious because there seems to be a continuity discrepancy in the Bible. In the Old Testament, the God of the Holy Bible told the Israelites they are to buy their bondservants or slaves from the heathens around them. In the New Testament, there seems to be no bondservants or heathen slaves, but yet there are still servants. This raises some questions. When writing the New Testament, did the authors of the Bible forget the difference between indentured servant and bondservant as established in Exodus 21 and Leviticus 25 and start referring to them both as servants? Had slavery been abolished in the New Testament, leaving only hired hands and indentured servants? If so, did not the authors of the Bible think the mass emancipation of bondservants an important enough event to be worth noting in the Bible? Did they not think the reader would ever question the apparent sudden disappearance of slaves? This is one of the discrepancies in the Holy Bible that erodes the credibility of it being divinely inspired by an all-knowing and infallible God. It makes the claim seem more plausible that the Bible was actually written by people without any influence or participation of a deity. To be clear, I do not believe evil exists, nor do I believe objective or prescriptive morals exist. I no more believe that a hurricane that kills thousands and leaves thousands more homeless is evil than I believe it is evil for a fox to kill and eat a quail. A natural disaster is not evil. It is unfortunate, but it's a simple force of nature without direction from a consciousness. I believe it's entirely possible that morals can develop naturally in a community without the intervention of a deity. I can't say that this is exactly how we came to having morals, but until we can irrefutably rule it out as a possibility, I have no reason to believe morals must only come from a deity. When people do horrific, harmful things to other people, I call it immoral. However, it is an acknowledgement based on my own personal ideas of morality. So, in speaking about whether or not I find biblical slavery moral or immoral, I acknowledge that I am speaking in regard to the morals I hold personally and to those of the society of which I am a member, but not to any kind of universal or objective morals. From Leviticus 25, verses 39 and 40, we see that the God of the Holy Bible didn't want Hebrew servants to be treated or compelled like bondservants, but rather to be treated with the dignity of a hired hand. From Exodus 21:20, that dignity included beatings, and with such severity that the authors of the Bible thought it was pertinent to include a law that the Hebrew servant must not die within a couple of days of the beating, or the master would suffer severe consequences. Remember, this is a law regarding not heathen slaves, but indentured Hebrew servants. Clearly, Hebrew masters could beat servants, and beat them severely enough that it could be life-threatening for the servant. But as long as they did not die within a day or two, there was no consequence to the Hebrew master. Where then, in the Holy Bible, do we find the laws to protect the heathen slaves from being outright beaten to death? The fact is, there are none. The only laws regarding heathen slaves, as handed down from the God of the Holy Bible, is where Hebrew masters can acquire bondservants, and from what people those bondservants come from. I think it's reasonable to consider that if the God of the Holy Bible thought it was important enough to make a law to protect Hebrew servants from being beaten to death at the hands of their Hebrew masters, and didn't want servants to be treated like slaves, then beating slaves to death was probably a fairly common occurrence. Otherwise, there would be no reason for a God to be concerned with a Hebrew servant being treated like a slave. Thus, there simply would be no reason for a God to hand down a law to protect the Hebrew servant from the Hebrew master. The Bible endorses slavery and makes it okay to consider slaves as property. Leviticus 25, verse 45. Moreover, of the children of the strangers that do sojourn among you, of them shall ye buy, and of their families that are with you, which they begat in your land, and they shall be your possession. The authors of the Holy Bible had a rather insidious means to keep some indentured servants forever. They could downgrade them to bondservant status by what I can only describe as an unscrupulous action akin to terrorist tactics. They did it by holding the servant's family hostage. Exodus 21, verses 2 through 6. If thou buy a Hebrew servant, 6 years he shall serve, and in the 7th year he shall go out free for nothing. If he came in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he were married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master have given him a wife, and she have borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. And if the servant shall plainly say, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free, then his master shall bring him unto the judges. He shall also bring him unto the door or unto the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. We see in Exodus 21 the servant is offered the opportunity of freedom after 6 years of servitude, as the God of the Holy Bible commands. However, if his Hebrew master had given him a wife during his indenturement, and if he had children by that wife, both his wife and children remain the property of the Hebrew master and are held hostage by the Hebrew master. If the Hebrew servant truly loves his wife and children, he will naturally feel he can't leave them behind and would feel compelled to remain with his family. Under duress, the servant is coerced into making this choice. He is then subjected to the dehumanization of having his ear pierced to show his status as a bondservant, and he is then forced to serve as the slaves do, forever. In this case, the authors of the Bible did not seem concerned with whether or not this servant is protected as a servant or unprotected as a slave. A female servant shared much in common with slaves. Women servants were not considered indentured. They remained property just as any heathen slave. Exodus 21, verse 4. If his master have given him a wife, and she have borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. Exodus 21, verse 6. And if a man sells his daughter to be a maidservant, she shall not go out as the men servants do. There is, however, an exception regarding the female Hebrew servant. In Exodus 21, 7 through 11, if the Hebrew servant girl is rejected as a wife by the purchaser or his sons, and they do not wish to feed her or care for her, they can set her free, but without any money. Female slaves could be raped and impregnated against their will. Genesis 16, verses 1 through 4. Now Sarah, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had an handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. Sarah said unto Abram, Behold now, the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarah. And Sarah, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her unto her husband Abram to be his wife. And he went unto Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. We can safely consider handmaids are not indentured servants, but are actually bondservants or slaves. As in the case of Genesis 16, 1 through 4, the handmaid was an Egyptian, not a Hebrew, and as such is a heathen. In Genesis 30, verses 2 through 5 and 9 through 12, demonstrate 2 more cases where 2 other slave women, Bilhah and Zilpah, are made to bear children for Jacob, Abraham's grandson. So the issues I have concerning servitude and slavery in the Holy Bible. Bond servitude or slavery clearly means the permanent ownership of people that, like property and livestock, can be handed down from parents to children through inheritance. Bond servants have no hope of returning to their own people or families and cannot pursue their own dreams in life. Their daily work for the rest of their lives is to the benefit of their masters or owners and not to their own. Child slavery is permitted, and this strikes me as tragic, as children need to be nurtured and loved. There were no laws handed down by the biblical God to protect slaves from their masters, and as such, they could be beaten to death without the master suffering any consequences. Women servants are regarded as property and are not allowed to go free after 6 years of service. Instead, they are made into wives, and neither Exodus nor Leviticus mentions if the woman has a right to refuse to be sold into servitude or into marriage. Women could be given as pseudo-wives to indentured servants. The indentured servant could not keep the wife when his 6-year indentureship was over. She remained the property of her Hebrew master. Ownership of children born to any woman who had been given to an indentured servant were kept by the Hebrew master. This seems much like a human breeding program for the sake of gaining more servants. Indentured servants could be downgraded to slave status by Hebrew masters holding their families hostage. Slave women could be raped for the sake of impregnating and were not given any say in whether or not they wished to be surrogate wombs of their master's children. Personally, I find the above 8 points to be a rather significant violation to my personal sense of morals. I'm sure most anyone born and raised in the Western world would also agree that these points are indeed immoral by Western world standards. I wish to emphasize that I acknowledge that I can't say any of these things are universally or objectively immoral. However, I can say I see no redeeming qualities in them, nor any defensible positions to justify them. On a closing note, I realize I have not covered all there is in regard to servitude as presented in the Holy Bible. There are many important points I've not made in this 2-part video response. The fact is, it would take something much like a video essay to sufficiently discuss biblical servitude. Perhaps one day I may consider doing so. Thank you for watching, and please feel free to rate and comment.